Now, if you didn't yet hear the prior episode where I'm in conversation with Dave Kramer, I highly recommend to begin there because this one right here is a follow-up of that. This is where I'm unpacking certain relevant points of this story further to really show the connections that I've been making that I feel are really valuable for everyone to look at with me. Welcome to this provocative and heartfelt podcast where patriarchy is defined as a paradigm that both men and women uphold in different ways. Here you get to listen in on genuine conversations between leaders from around the world to discover more mutual respect and less division, as well as more pleasure and love in your life. My name is Dévashi Shakti, and you are warmly welcome to be part of these Beyond Patriarchal Sex conversations. I am wondering how you've been going taking in Hannah Clarke's story. I know for me that there are so many alarming points that stand out to me when I went deep into looking into her case more recently before I spoke with Dave. And yeah, what that includes is the really irresponsible statement that the police officer made who officially reported the case to the media at the time after this femicide, homicide. And I did mention that for a moment in conversation with Dave. And, the whole situation revealed many layers, multiple layers of patriarchy to be addressed in just about everyone involved. Even those witnessing from a distance, you and I included. And it could be called many other things: professional negligence, avoidance, embedded attitudes, etc., etc. But what all of those things have in common is that they are patriarchal attitudes or the trauma responses to that. So, what that police officer actually said in the media report was this: is this a case of a woman suffering significant domestic violence, with her and her children perishing at the hands of her husband? Or is this an instance of a husband being driven too far? That's what I mentioned when I was talking to Dave closer to the start of the last episode. And I'm not sure exactly what his position is or was at the time in the police, but I saw that he was asked to step aside after making that media statement when reporting on the case, and rightly so, because the patriarchal thinking within what he said is so blatant. It sounds like he's insinuating that Baxter is excused, or if his actions were justified somehow if she had have antagonized him, and that he has some kind of understandable right to act the way that he did, perhaps, depending on how she was, which is just insane. And the fact that the police were already well aware of how dysfunctional Baxter was, they were involved already before it got to the murders. So it was highly negligent for him in a position of authority to be saying that to the public, knowing that it's not just a simple matter of reporting on this case, it's a representation of attitudes, patriarchal attitudes, including at the hands of law enforcement, which sends a very dangerous signal to guys that are similar to Baxter. And when I hear other femicide cases, especially online, when I follow some accounts that report on the women that are being killed at the hands of a man that they know, usually, there are horrible attitudes that some guys feel entitled to carry on with, such as, is she still warm? I'll have a go. Or he didn't hit her hard enough. Or some other disgusting thing that a man writes openly, even when his profile is not private. And, you can see that he's a husband and a father. And yeah, yet he's looking at a photograph of a deceased victim of male violence and they're able to say something like that. It's just absolutely beyond disgusting. So, patriarchal entitlement, misogyny, it comes in many different forms. It can be extreme, like Baxter. It can be blatantly embedded, like the police statement that was made, or those horrific comments online about other women who I just mentioned. The problem is how common this thinking is. And plenty of men very much still hold that patriarchal attitude now in 2026, where they believe that it's a woman's job to service her husband sexually no matter what. That is actual sexual slavery. And it's been so embedded, so normalized. And you probably know that in the legal systems around the world, talking about Western world, the legal system itself reflects this because marital rape was not actually a crime until very recently. So this entitled attitude over women and women's bodies and children, actually. And I want to say more about the sexual coercion part of this case because I do see that it was a bit overlooked in understanding this case just based on the reports that I happened to see. And obviously, what was involved in Hannah's situation was a very extreme expression of patriarchal sex, sexual coercion, as a precursor to these murders. But what I saw in the reports, and I've watched many of the, true crime level of breaking down the whole situation, and also mental health therapists weighing in on the different psychologies at play. And what I noticed is that people kept saying that Baxter's psychological coercion hadn't ever escalated to physical violence before he murdered his family and himself. And Hannah herself is on the police body camera prior to her murder saying that he wasn't physically assaulting her, but that she was, basically afraid of him, that he was dangerous. But the thing here that I'm saying got overlooked is that sexual coercion is assault. It's just that it's under the radar because patriarchal sex itself has been so invisible to most, from attitudes around women having to let a man emotionally regulate himself through using her body, whether she wants it then or not. And when women are treated that way for generations, which has often been the case if we consider the last hundreds or thousands of years, a woman can start to assume that maybe it kind of is her role in a way, and she'll internalize the normalized patriarchy and, where she's trying to keep the peace. And often women are not fully in touch with asserting themselves and attuning to themselves in ways that can cut off that behavior with men from the start, which might look like leaving them or otherwise. And, this is where the Tigress path comes in to help women really, really connect with their instincts and to deeply trust that. And in fact, in the end, it was reported that Hannah did feel very, very afraid. And she was talking to someone about writing a will, and that she was openly saying, basically, he's going to kill me. And so, this intuition, this instinctive knowing, it needs to be taken seriously, very seriously, so that a woman, even just on the extreme patriarchal sex level, so she isn't spending years enduring normalized abuse because it can escalate to further physical violence or worse in this case. So, what I'm saying here is that sexual coercion is a form of violence and it needs to be recognized as such by everyone, by men, by women, by law enforcement. And I think it needs to be thoroughly investigated in these cases and get a more prominent place as a major sign of coercive control. But ongoing sexual coercion, the thing is, it's violence. It's physical violence, it's sexual violence, it's emotional violence, it's psychological violence, it's all of it. It's absolutely unmistakably violence. But with attitudes about women having to be sexually available, it just ends up being an invisible form of violence. that people can tend to downplay, especially between a married couple. And I would love to see that be changed, for sexual coercion to never be normalized, for it to be clearly seen for what it is, a criminal act, an act of real destruction between a man and a woman and inside of a woman. And as it concerns my work of guiding and educating and empowering women, it's about never being available for the kind of relating dynamics that indicate patriarchal behaviors. And this is part of how I've seen that this inquiry I'm offering of exploring how to live beyond patriarchal sex is not just some psycho-emotional contemplation for those in a post-traumatic growth place in their life with relative safety to be able to consider their evolutionary, ways forward. What I've realized in looking into this more so than before is that the patriarchal sex inquiry is entirely necessary for the collective with very real world implications. And the entitlement that leads to a man behaving in that sexually coercive way with a woman, it needs to be greatly questioned and further explored and no longer hidden in plain view. And this is the value of actually naming it as patriarchal sex. So while I know that sexual coercion is officially on the list of known coercive control behaviors, I noticed it got overlooked quite a bit in this particular case with Hannah. So the inquiry that's opened up for me here is how clearly it shows the patriarchal psychology in men and how it can potentially lead to this outcome, or at least just to domestic violence in general. And so while not all men who think in a misogynistic way act out the same as Baxter did, what I'm saying is the problem is not just some extreme actions in some men. It's the thinking behind it that might be in most men. It's the same thinking that happens amongst men from the most patriarchal religions of the world, which view women as inferior, as subordinate, as subhuman, seeing that she's just a resource for the man to utilize, which is essentially treating her like a slave, where she's never going to be equal in value to him. All of that male god, male entitlement that gives men the impression that they are in fact superior and they can do whatever they want, that paradigm has a word and it's called patriarchy. And I'm saying that whether a man is believing those misogynistic patriarchal views at all, that is the problem, not just the extreme expressions of it. So very obviously, not all men with patriarchal psychology murder women and children when they can't handle their emotions. But that way of thinking is inherently flawed because the possibility of mutual respect is not compatible with patriarchal ideas in between a couple. And when that couple can't learn how to relate in a healthy way, their children tend to carry the trauma or replicate the same dysfunctions. If you've been enjoying the contemplations from listening to the episodes of this podcast and you're ready to take things to the next step, to actually be living beyond patriarchal sex in your life, in your relationship, whether that's one you're in now or one you'd like to be in future, if you are a woman, if you're a man, if you're a couple, do feel free to reach out. There's a no obligation connection call that I welcome you to. And also, if you're a woman that wants to integrate the embodied knowledge that leads to more women being able to live beyond patriarchal sex and more, also the connection call is to inquire about training as well. So I look forward to hearing from you. So here are some questions to ponder and, to ask yourselves if you are in a relationship, if you're willing to explore. Because just because a man is not acting out in extreme ways, does he feel entitled to sex with his wife? Does he feel entitled to a woman's body? Is he self-orientated during sex? Is he bypassing her biological orgasmic range, understanding her body, knowing her body, and expecting her to just tolerate a minor level of focus on her pleasure if she's lucky, while the main event is what serves him? You know, it's even in the language. Foreplay is considered like this precursor to the main event. It's considered optional. And that's actually what accesses a woman's pleasure, but it gets overlooked much of the time for focus on the main event, which is centered around a man's penis. Like it's so literal when it comes to actual patriarchal sex. And more questions. Does he, a man, view women as subordinate to himself, even if it's subtle? Is he aware of what patriarchal thinking even entails? And is he even curious to find out? Is he arrogant based just on the privileges of being a man? And is he assuming that he's so great already that this conversation of defining patriarchal sex isn't for him because he's beyond looking into the possibility of new growth and expansion? Is he lacking humility and self-inquiry even after the release of the Epstein files, which clearly shows the embedded entitlement in men having power over women and children in particular? There's a lot more to the files situation, but the patriarchal entitlement is certainly a part of it. And that same misogynistic thinking leading to entitled behaviors is something the society we have known so far has encouraged and rewarded a lot of the time, with only a very recent period of time in human history where that's begun to change in the legal system after thousands of years of domination over women and children, where they were treated as his possessions with little to no legal rights of their own. This was the case for thousands of years on Earth before now in most cultures. It's still the case in an extreme way in some cultures. And that thinking was present in Rowan Baxter and many other men like him. And, you know, that sheer amount of human history through cellular memory passed down through our ancestors, it's going to impact how a man relates with the feminine. How could it not? So, with the discussions here at the Beyond Patriarchal Sex project, I'm not asking or expecting for men to perfectly be across all of this. Instead, what I'm doing is inviting men to be courageous enough to even dare to look into it and to join the inquiry and to be part of the needed evolution for his own sake and for the chance for him to have a healthy, incredible relationship with a woman, as well as for everyone's well-being, you know, and likewise, women being invited into this inquiry. And one of the main things I want to highlight with that is that if you feel bad as a woman for mentioning the word patriarchy, you are part of upholding it in a subtle way. If you feel bad for the men that they might, you know, do well at tuning to this conversation, then you aren't clear about what it is. If you still think as a woman that patriarchy equates to men or masculinity, you don't even understand the terminology yourself. And when you have that flinching and that hesitation inside of you, you are not a safe place for a man to properly learn about this through you the way that he could. So there's a lot of clarifying and, you know, as well as releasing of our own past trauma. Obviously, that's the starting point. But there's a lot of clarity here for women, you know, and of course, all the ways that women unconsciously are part of it, especially with internalizing it. And these are just some of my thoughts, and I invite you to share yours as well in the comment section wherever you see this podcast posted, and especially where I can see it, where you're welcome to reach out to me personally as well. And a main outcome of this whole project, which is including the patriarchal sex survey and this podcast, the main outcome is to clearly explain what patriarchal sex is and how to live beyond it in a book form, which gives structure to the process of freeing oneself from this generational trauma of patriarchal sex. And it's going to be something that's relevant for men to read as well as women, and for couples to explore together. Originally, I intended to write it for women because I knew that women are, more willing to dive into this on a whole as men. But the more the podcast has been going, the more I've noticed the male listeners have increased a little bit. And with everything going on in the world right now, at the time of recording this, it's March, early March 2026, we can see what's going on the planet. We can see what immature male leadership is doing. And if you think it's worthy to question that, it also has a relevance at the very personal level inside of us, because while these characters may be living large and their shadows are very visible to many of us, we also have our own. And the willingness to look into that is something that needs a process. So I've been asked by various professionals who work in the sexuality field, especially, or in the therapy and personal growth space. I've been asked if they can be part of bringing this education with me on patriarchal sex to their groups and to their clients. And I would love to see that happen. But really, the first step is for the book to be written and then to be published, and for then educational courses to come out of that with definitive processes that we can all get behind, and people can go and share with their own flavor. But the thing is, so far, I haven't had a whole lot of time to look at properly writing the book, because creating this podcast takes quite a bit of time. And teaching the trainings for women and the personal immersions that I do, where I make my income, that's also happening all at the same time. And I definitely can't let go of the time it takes to maintain my deep spiritual practices, which do take a few hours each day. Definitely, because I am facing the complexity of quite a lot of warfare on various levels of reality that I'm up against in bringing this topic forward. So if there is anyone with the capacity to be a benefactor of the Beyond Patriarchal Sex project to help support the release of this book, please do make yourself known. I have been supported with my work through donations a couple of times, just like one person 1 year, another person a few years later, not small donations. I've never had that situation, but I've had 2 times people give substantial donations because they can see what I'm actually working on and they want to encourage that and support it. But the thing is, I've never actually asked for it myself. And it's actually really not easy for me to do that, since I'm very, very independent. But I can see how it would support this project moving forward more quickly. And so I'm willing to make myself uncomfortable by asking. And the thing is, I will be doing it anyway. It will just take longer. So if you have received some value here, if your own contemplations have been sparked, if you have anything to share on this, I welcome you to join the conversation, be part of the community around this, be in touch with me personally if you like. And of course, if you would like to explore these themes on a deeper therapeutic personal level, whether for yourself or for your relationship, that's also a way that you can support this whole project moving forward, to invest in working with me on that level as well. This really is challenging work. And if you're still listening at this point, then I'm celebrating you. Because while it's challenging, it's also some of the most liberating things we can possibly face for ourselves. Because what's on the other side of patriarchal relating is something a lot of people have never even imagined before, let alone experienced. And that is going to be available more and more for humanity, more and more for the coming generations. But we've got to be willing to look at what's not allowing it to appear, because it's actually our most natural state to be healthy in ourselves and in harmony with each other. But there's really just a lot kind of in between at this time. I was going to say in the way, but I mean, it is and it isn't. It's all just consequences of past actions, including our ancestors, the generations that have come before us. And it just is what it is. And with some of the most challenging things in life, we can either avoid it or we can actually look at it and say, oh my God, look at how I get to live my life at a level of liberation and expansion that the people that came before me didn't get to have. Like, I want to be part of that. So, depending on how you're hearing all of this and how you receive it, depends on which one of those two responses that you lean to the most. But really, I'm just impressed that you're even listening to this podcast and you're willing to even be aware of this inquiry. So, thank you for listening. Having listened to this episode, if there's something in here that you want to keep exploring, a great way to do that is to share it with a friend. I've noticed that a lot of people don't feel so comfortable to engage publicly on social media about these episodes when they're posted. And so maybe sending the episodes privately to friends might feel easier for some people. And please know that whenever you save an episode or comment on the podcast and subscribe to the podcast, that is also enormously helpful in helping to spread the word about this inquiry into patriarchal sex. And so whatever way you wish to engage, you are so welcome. There's also the Patriarchal Sex Survey. The link to that you will find in the show notes. And if you would just like to reach out and share your particular concerns or personal situations with me, and you can reach out on social media or on email, and I look forward to sharing the next episode with you.